Welcome back, everybody. We're talking today about gap years and medical school. And I'll be honest, I had never really thought about a gap year in medical school, but my lovely colleague, Lauren DiProspero, who is our resident expert on all things medical school, having been director of admissions at both Stanford and Columbia's medical schools, is joining us today to share information about this. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Beth.
All right, well, med school gap year. What is this? Is this kind of like when you take a gap year between high school and college? What's it all about?
Yeah, so it's time off between graduating from college and starting medical school. So in that sense, it's similar to that year that you might take before college. But what's different is that in this case, work experience is nearly universal, and some people will take multiple years off. So we may use the term gap year, but it might be gap years, depending on the individual.
Okay. So you mentioned work experience. So I know that, for example, when I think about an MBA, one of the things that's very common is that you don't typically go right from your undergraduate to an MBA. And yet I know for medical school, quite a few of my friends in college who went to medical school went right from college into medical school. So who are the students for whom that's generally not the best idea?
Yeah, so it is becoming very common to take multiple years or to take a year. The application process starts so very early. The application, the AMCAS for the allopathic schools opens in May, which if you kind of back up taking the MCAT, you're really making this decision in, mid-year of your junior year if you're in college. And so, it's become more and more common. The age of matriculation has crept up over the years. So, it's not surprising that back when I was in college, when you were in college, a lot of people were going straight on. But the AMCAS, which is the body that oversees allopathic medical school admissions, has some data that the average age of matriculants is 24. And 64% of students who matriculate to medical school report taking one or more years between college and medical school. And it can be for all sorts of different reasons that people decide to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I know that one of the challenges I see in students who are in high school who want to go to medical school, and this is actually something we used to joke about when I was in admissions at Penn, was just how many questions I would get about because when I was at Penn, did not, and Penn still does not have a 7-8 year automatic into medical school program, but Penn State did. And so I would occasionally get the student who confused Penn with Penn State and would ask me about that. And, it just became this running joke about these kids who want to be in medical school tomorrow. And I see it, they've decided this is what they want to do and they want to do it right away.
Right.
And yet what we also see is they get to college and sometimes they change their mind. It just feels like so much education, you almost want to be sure of it. So tell us about some of the reasons why. You said there are a lot. I'd love to kind of understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the common ones is lack of experience in a certain area. So what are the gaps in your application? Because one of the things that you want to do is to be able to assess, what does your application to medical school look like? What are the gaps, right? And so maybe you didn't research during undergraduate. Maybe your clinical work isn't as strong as it could be. Maybe you have a mediocre or low GPA and you need that time either to show continued success through your senior year, or maybe to do a post-bac or to take a handful of classes because maybe you're a few, science classes short. Right. There are also letters of recommendation, right? Do you have enough individuals that are willing to write letters for you? It can be a substantial amount, that you have to ask for those letters of recommendation. Maybe you've met with your pre-med advisor and that person is recommending taking additional time. And then, like you said, the uncertainty. Maybe you're wavering in your commitment to medical school, which is absolutely okay, right? That time off can help you target your medical exposure and your exposure to healthcare and help you decide that. And honestly, I think that one of the biggest reasons to take a gap year is just a chance to step off the treadmill.
Hmm.
right? You're
Yes.
going, going, going. Most of our listeners are still in high school or families of students still in high school. That's a long time to just keep going, right? And
Mhm.
when you have this goal of medical school, it's sometimes tackled with the same intensity when they step foot on campus for the first time.
Right.
And healthcare burnout is very real, right? Pandemic notwithstanding, it is a real thing. And a year or two away from school can really help you become a more successful med student and then a more successful doctor when you make it to that point.
Right. And, I'll tell you, anecdotally, my best friend from college is a doctor, and she did take some time off. She actually ended up doing a master's program and then applied to medical school. But one of the things that she shared was when she got to medical school, she had a tough major in college. We went to a good, tough school, and that med school was substantially more difficult. She's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really having to learn how to study in a completely different way. I feel like for the first time. And this is someone who'd been a top student her whole life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can imagine that if you've just come out of college, which was challenging, and then you go directly into the next step, and
Yep.
it's twice as hard, that it would be, I don't know how she would have done it. I think she would say that too if she had gone right away.
Yeah, and a very apt, one of my students in medical school once said that attending medical school your first year is like drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah.
It's very intense. Even though most students come in with a preparation for it, it's very hard. There is
Yes.
no sugarcoating it. It is very, very hard. And any medical student will tell you that.
Yeah, and I think at a lot of colleges, it's often harder to get in than it is to stay in. And I know medical school, there's no room for people to become doctors who can't handle it. So
Right,
there,
exactly.
no grade inflation. You need to learn it.
Yep,
If you don't
exactly.
pass gross anatomy, you
Yep,
can't be operating on people.
right.
So if you are listening and you decide you're a student, or the parent of a student who's considering medical school, and you decide, gap year sounds like a really good idea, what's the first step that you would take if you're
Yeah.
that student?
Yeah. Well, I know I say this every time on the show talking about medical school, but I very much recommend talking to your pre-med advisor.
Yeah.
And the reason is that, like I said, they can assess those shortcomings in your medical school preparation that can help you figure out the best way to spend that time.
Yes.
Because you want to be smart about that, and it can be different for each person. Like I said, one could be looking for research, one could be looking for clinical. Maybe a student has everything they need, but they just love research and want to try it. That person can help you identify opportunities. And that neutral, knowledgeable professional knows how to help you figure that out and
Right.
knows how to assess, are you going to be a successful medical student, applicant, and when, at what point?
Right. And I think the underlying message here, especially because, as you say, every time we talk, you mentioned pre-health advising. If you are thinking medical school is going to be in your future, when you look at undergraduate programs,
Yeah,
you should be really investigating what they do for their pre-health students, right?
yeah,
For pre-health advising. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So, what when you were on the other side of the desk and reading applications, what were the kinds of things that you saw students spending their time on? It does sound like it's going to be different for every student based on what they need to improve on, but
Right.
I'd be curious, what are some things that you remember feeling like, oh yeah, that was a good use of their time?
Yeah, absolutely. Medical scribe is very common, so that
Hmm.
somebody's sitting in the room and writing down what the doctor is saying for medical records. It's great
Interesting.
insight because you see the patient doctor interaction from a third party as opposed to being the one there,
Yeah,
and you're asking questions of the doctor afterwards, right? That's not necessarily your job to be asking those questions, but
but you
the
can.
byproduct of being a coworker, right?
Right.
A research assistant, a medical translator, if you have language skills. Maybe you're interested in health policy, public health policy. That's a possibility. Becoming a CNA, a certified nursing assistant, is a great way to get that like hands-on exposure to the healthcare field.
Hmm.
Maybe as a patient advocate, as a hospital. Um, Contact tracers are in high demand right now.
Important right now, right?
But are, even when it's not a pandemic, there are routinely contact tracers for different diseases in cities and states across the country.
Mm.
And then many students are doing those volunteer oriented programs like Teach for America or City Year or Peace Corps. And then there are the students who maybe need the academic support and are doing a master's program or post-bac. And
Mhm.
that master's program could be because you like the subject. It doesn't have to be a record enhancer. Maybe you like public policy or whatever it might be that you want to get that degree before you go on. The one thing to note with a master's degree is that it will count in a GPA. So
So if you're gonna
when
do
you
it,
have those, if you're going to do it, that is going to be part of your record to medical school. So
right. Make
chances are you're going to want to try and do well anyway, but worth mentioning that grad school grades do still count in the medical school process.
Yes, which makes sense, especially if you're doing something ideally related to
Yes,
medicine, right? What if
exactly.
someone did, and actually I throw this out there, like
Hmm.
they were like, I love English, I'm going to do a master's in English, and then I'm going to apply to medical school. Did you
Yeah.
see something like that ever, or was it usually related?
Interesting. It was usually related, but as long as you have all of the key aspects, I don't see why not,
Yeah,
right? As
right.
long as you have that research and that clinical experience, you have all of the science, great. Like, as long as you have all of that. So maybe you're getting your master's in English and you're a medical scribe at night or
Yeah,
whatever it might be. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
makes you
there's
more well-rounded.
there's no restriction on what you can do so long as you have that basic the basic parts of a medical school application.
Cool. Any
Yeah.
last advice for students out there? One I will throw out last
Yeah.
advice is Lauren's been on the show a number of times over the past few months, and we've been talking about a lot of things related to medical school. So if you are just now coming to this first segment and saying, oh, I want to hear more from Lauren, well, go into our archives. If you search on our blog, we blog about every podcast. So if you're wondering when she appeared, you can find the blog right up, and then that will give you the data that the podcast aired on. But
Yeah.
what about
Yeah.
your advice, Lauren?
Yes, absolutely. And there are other blogs as well that don't make it on the radio show. So certainly there's a wealth of information there as
That's
well.
true.
I think, I kind of two last minute pieces of advice. One is to figure out as you're planning for your gap year, which if you're a junior in college, you're starting to think about whether or not that makes sense for you. So
Mhm.
plan for your gap year, but also plan for what the timeline might be for applying to medical school for you
Got it.
so that you can kind of work backward, right?
Mhm.
That way you're meeting any deadlines for your pre-med advisor because they likely help out alumni who are applying to medical school, right? That
Mhm.
you understand what you need to start this process because I think it can be easy to lose track of time, right? Going from college to the workforce, the year has a different feeling to it. There's no natural, like, now it's spring semester, now it's summer,
Right.
right? Kind of, it doesn't fold into one, but it can be easy to lose track of that and to keep on that timeline and knowing that that can be adjusted. Maybe you do want to take that extra year. You can push it off, but always saying, okay, what is my timeline?
Right.
Um, and then I think that, you can do anything healthcare related or get a master's in English, but ultimately do something that you enjoy, right?
Mhm.
If you're curious about public health policy, pursue it. If you love research, do that because at the end of the day, this is something that you're going to be talking a lot in your medical school interviews.
Mhm.
On top of it being your life and you want to do something you enjoy, you're also leveraging this year in this application process. It might end up in your essays. It'll definitely be talked about in your interviews. So really make the most of it, enjoy it. Maybe you don't get your first choice job, but look for something in the field that you are interested in and have to round out your application with. And it'll just make that time more enjoyable and really clarify what you want to do in the future with medical school.
Yeah. Such great advice as always, Lauren. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about some tips for asking for more scholarship money, which I think regardless of where we're at in the current world, who doesn't want more money, but particularly now when things are a little unstable, I think we have some good advice for you, so don't go away.